Greetings. I guess I should say up front that I'm new here, so be patient with me, as I don't know all the rules or etiquette or whatnot. A friend of mine linked me to this board after I told him a story and showed him the materials I'm about to share with you. He thinks some of you will appreciate it, but to be honest, from where I'm sitting, this site seems more like a haven for idiots than a serious paranormal image board, but whatever. I'm motivated to share this stuff, and need to do so anonymously, for reasons which will become clear. Technically, I'm breaking the law, but if I understand how this place works, this thread will disappear in a day or so. Here's the deal. I'm a production editor at a small independent publisher in the US. I won't say which or where, and don't ask me, as I'd like to keep my job. The pay isn't great, but it's an easy gig, and I like the people I work with. A lot of what we publish are what you'd call coffee table books. The kind people flip through when they're bored, but almost nobody ever reads cover to cover. Bland, pictorial historicals of certain cities or states that sell well in a region, like in a gift shop. The occasional book of maps or biography. A few museums outsource their gallery catalogs to us, that kind of thing. The work is boring, but it's steady, and we get enough jobs, and our books make enough money to stay afloat. Which is a lot more than most small places can say these days. Because we've been around a while, our name is somewhat known to history buffs and people who think they're an expert on such and such town in nowhere, Idaho, or an eccentric topic nobody really cares about. We get a lot of unsolicited manuscripts from people that really shouldn't be writing books, and unsolicited CDs full of pictographs and people that shouldn't be taking pictures. Because we're small and don't have a separate acquisitions editor position, the job of going through this slush pile gets passed around the office. Very rarely, someone will find something worth pursuing and pitch it to the rest of us. But our senior editor/publisher always gets the final say. For the last 9 months, I've been working more or less non-stop on a book that everybody at the office was pretty excited about. Our copy editor found it during his turn with the pile. An old guy I won't name had contacted us out of the blue and offered us a chance to publish his rare archival photo collection, provided we treat the subject matter with respect and seriousness that he felt it deserved. To use his term, and what was going to be the book's title, the photos were all anomalies. That is to say, they depicted something out of the ordinary or otherwise inexplainable, something that usually had an equally interesting story to go along with it. Most of them were from the first half of the 20th century. Like I said, it's not the kind of thing we normally publish. But the few samples that this guy sent in with his pitch letter were pretty compelling. And once we had seen the rest of them, heard a few of the stories, and realized that none of these pictures were widely known, we knew that this was something that would get the people's attention. The format was going to be simple and classy, with a lot of space and breathing room. Each photo would appear as a high-quality print on the right-hand page, followed by the blank left-hand page, and then a couple of paragraphs to caption each photo on the following right-hand page. From the very beginning, the guy was a nightmare to work with, and the job took forever because he refused to send in more than one document at a time. He would send me certified mail. I would get it, scan it, mail it back certified, and only then would he send the next one. He seemed to think he had an extremely valuable collection and was hugely paranoid about losing it. So he only risked one item at a time. In the end, we spent so much money on mailing costs that it would have been cheaper to fly me to where this old guy lived with a scanner and a laptop. We were maybe a third of the way through the production process when this fucking guy pulled out the rug from under us. Somebody had offered him a large sum of money for the photos. Way more than we were offering for the book rights. On the condition that the book get shit-canned and the photos stay out of the public eye. We demanded he come in for a face-to-face and try to reason with him. Cater to his pride and desire for scholarly acclaim. And for a few days it seemed to have worked. But when he got home, he flip-flopped again and started cursing me out, along with my senior editor on the phone, demanding that we shelve the book. He hired a lawyer who came up with some BS and voided his contract. And then he threatened us with a lawsuit that would bankrupt us if we went ahead with the project and lost. To add insult to injury, the law firm sent this annoying little IT guy to our office to make sure the materials were wiped from our computers. Because the vast majority of it existed on my machine, and I had spent literally months of my life on this project. I felt, and still feel, the most violated and bitter about this whole thing. Somebody should benefit from all that work, hence my reason for coming here. Unfortunately, I don't have the high-resolution scans I made of these photos, but I did keep working drafts of the original captions and 14 medium-res placeholder thumbnails that Quark created as I was laying out the original version of this book. Don't ask me why we're still using Quark. It's what we know and what we paid for a long time ago. I'm not supposed to, but I occasionally take home what I'm working with. The full file with the full res images embedded gets way too large and unwildly to bring home with me. Most of the time, I'm just experimenting with fonts and layouts and whatnot. Anyway, after all this shit went down, I discovered that I had a working file on my home machine of what we had done so far. So I printed it to a PDF and then stripped the text and images from the PDF file. You folks will be the benefactories of that. Just to be clear, I don't claim anything with regards to the veracity and prevalence of these photos. I'm not here to convince you that they're real. I'm just putting them out there because I think they deserve to be seen and not hidden in some rich prick's private collection. Photo 1 of 14. The Colin Wood Fire. This is the last known photo taken inside the Lakeview School in Collinwood, Ohio, before it was consumed by a fire on March 4th, 1908, killing 172 students, 2 teachers, and 1 rescuer. The fire started when a ceiling joist ignited from a nearby steam pipe. Flames blocked escape routes, leading to panic and a stampede that trapped a large number of victims in the stairwell, where they were cooked alive. Additional casualties were incurred when burning students jumped from 2nd and 3rd story windows. Everyone in this photo perished, except for Mr. Olson, seated at the far right in the back row. The spectral artifacts in the photo remain unexplained. Photo 2 of 14. Charlie Newman's last interview. Charlie Newman was an amateur folkist who traveled through the South and southwestern United States during the early years of the 20th century, collecting tall tales and stories of the supernatural. According to his wife, Ellie, Charlie was told a story one day by an Oklahoma farmer about a strange woman who lived alone on an isolated property in the Panhandle. The farmer claimed that the woman was not a woman at all, but something else. Something that hid its true nature beneath a headscarf, and was never seen without a large dog by its side. Noonman was apparently intrigued enough to go searching for this woman during one of his research road trips. He was never seen again. Ellie Noonman was later contacted by a Tulsa pawnbroker who remembered reading about her husband's disappearance in the paper and finding his name engraved on a camera sold to him. The pawnbroker returned the camera, and Mrs. Noonman had the film inside developed in hopes of finding a clue as to his whereabouts. This was the only picture on the roll. Unfortunately, neither the location of the property nor the name of the farmer who told him the story was recorded in Noonman's notes. Photo 3 of 14. The death of John Ulsted. This prophetically torn photo depicts a regimental color guard of the Union Army 1 month before they marched into battle, September 1862. The gentleman on the far right, named John Ulsted, had the right side of his face and right arm blown off by cannon fire at the start of these hostilities. It's unknown exactly when the damage to the photo occurred. Photo 4 of 14. The Axeman of New Orleans. Edward Martel was an unsuccessful French photographer and inventor who traveled throughout the U.S. during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, trying to drum up interest in investors for a device that added timer to automatic exposure features to Kodak's popular line of folding brownie cameras. During his travels, he took thousands of automated photos to test and refine his invention. Often, he would wake up early, set up a hidden camera in an inconspicuous spot on the street of whatever city he happened to be in, then walk to a nearby cafe or bar so that he could capture candid scenes of daily life. The best of these photos were selected for Martel's one and only gallery show in Paris, 1924. Unfortunately, Martel died penniless and unknown in 1955. And it was left to his daughter, Janie, to sift and sort through the boxes and boxes of photos that were left behind, to see what should be kept and what could be discarded. During this process, she came across this photo, taken in New Orleans the morning of October 28, 1919, hours before Martel boarded a steamer ship to return to France. It turns out Martel hated motion blurs in his photographs because he thought that they would reflect badly on the speed and accuracy of this lens. This prejudice made him cast aside and overlook what was probably the most important photo he ever took. What makes this photo so special? The night before this was taken, the notorious and still unidentified serial killer known as the Axeman of New Orleans had committed his last murder, hacking Mike Pepitone to death in his bedroom and then fleeing the scene just as his wife had discovered the body. Could this be him returning to the residence? It's impossible to say, but if it is, the image appears to be the legend based on the shaky testimony of Pauline and Mary Bruno and prevailing prejudice of the time, that only a black man was capable of such savagery. Photo 5 of 14. The Grand Caverns Cryptoids. This photo was taken in 1895 by an amateur spelunker / photographer named Orrin Jeffries while exploring an unmapped section of the Grand Caverns in southwestern Virginia. At the time it was taken, Jeffries was conducting photographic experiments, using super long exposures to see if anything at all could be captured in total absence of light, otherwise known as cave darkness. He would situate himself on level ground, extinguish his lantern, and open the lens of his homemade box camera as long as he could stand the darkness. During one of these experiments, he heard something approach from the deeper recesses of the cave. Frightened, Jeffries abandoned his experiment and set off one of his flashes that he used for taking traditional photos underground. According to a report he later gave a local newspaper, he saw a humanoid creature staring at him in the shadows and took off running in the other direction, and didn't stop running until he was topside. Several days later, he returned with 3 other men to retrieve his box camera. This is the image that was recorded on the inside film. Photo 6 of 14. The Harlow Twins. 1938. Evergreen Park outside of Chicago. Billy and Stevie Harlow were riding in the front seat with their mother, Tammy, when their Ford sedan collided head-on with a Chrysler. During the collision, the car spun in such a way as to impact 2 additional vehicles. The mother, Tammy Harlow, survived, but the boys were ejected through the windshield and killed instantly. The crime scene photographer from the local newspaper took this shot as the crew of volunteers worked frantically to free John Downing, the driver of the Chrysler. It appears that little Billy and Stevie stuck around to watch. Photo 7 of 14. The Sorensen Tragedy. The Sorensens were a Danish family who immigrated to the United States sometime between 1905 and 1906. They arrived there with their eldest child, Anders, seen on the donkey, and settled on a farmstead in Missouri. 3 more children, Simone, Fricke, and Mathold, center, right, and in the wagon, respectively, soon followed. This photo, taken in 1916, captures all 4 of the children a few weeks before tragedy. The 3 eldest were apparently playing fort in the hay barn and must have fallen asleep. Their father, Nicholas, drove a wooden hay seat into the pile and dismembered all 3 of them, in locations accurately suggested by the flaw in the photo. The youngest was inside the house with her mother at the time and was not hurt. According to the son of a neighbor, later interviewed by the author, the donkey later died in an equally hideous fashion by getting its head caught in barbed wire fence and nearly decapitating itself in the frenzy to get free. The final detail could not be corroborated. Photo 8 of 14. The Spectre of Viola Peters. Viola Peters was a well-born spinster who lived alone in a small rural town in Georgia. She was much loved in her community for her charitable contributions to the Baptist church, the soup kitchen, and the local orphanage, especially during the Depression, when those institutions subsidized almost entirely on her. In July 1935, Viola was brutally raped and murdered by a drifter named Ton Cullen, who had worked briefly at a nearby copper refinery. Cullen proceeded to stay on in Viola's house and savage her corpse for an additional 17 days before he was caught and captured. A posse of enraged locals stormed the county jail, took Cullen, and lynched him from the old bridge over the Tacoma River. His photo was taken by Garrett Killen, a witness of the lynching, and caused quite a stir when it was published a few days later in the Atlantean Constitution. To most, it suggested that Viola's spirit achieved some measure of peace by attending her killer's execution. But some twisted minds saw her in forloom and longing to get a last look at her one and only lover. Photo 9 of 14. The Ghost of Sarah Estes. Danvers State Hospital was a psychiatric hospital built in 1874 on what was then an isolated site in rural Massachusetts. Like most asylums, it was famous for its Gothic architecture and its use of now outdated medical techniques to treat insanity. Danvers was often cited as the birthplace of prefrontal lobotomy. Danvers has several other claims to fame. It was the inspiration for the fictional Arkham Sanatorium that appeared in several stories by H.P. Lovecraft, and which in turn inspired Arkham Asylum, the fictional Batman universe. It was also where the cult film Session 9 was filmed. That film put the vast network of tunnels beneath the Danvers to good cinematic effect. It's no accident for the filmmakers to choose these tunnels, as rumors of their haunting had dogged Danvers over 100 years. The most famous story concerns Sarah Estes, a patient who escaped her ward in 1955 and snuck into the underground tunnel system. Despite multiple searches and a week-long lockdown of the asylum, Sarah was never seen again, and it was assumed that she died down there, lost, thirsty, and alone. A nurse at Danvers named Gail became obsessed with Sarah's story and spent many of her off hours searching the tunnels for her remains. Though her body was never found, she did snap this photo in late 1966, which suggests that Sarah still walks the Danvers tunnels to this very day. Photo 10 of 14. The Stevenson family portrait. Who says ghosts don't have a sense of humor? The Stevensons were a wealthy Boston family, proud of the industry and longevity with which most of the clan was blessed. This portrait, taken in 1945, was an effort to gather the oldest Stevensons together, with one of the youngest, Amelia, in the center. Aged 102, was granted the honor of matriarch, while little Ophelia was the token child at 18 months. What the Stevensons did not recognize until the photo was developed was that they had been joined that day by one of their deceased, James Pullman Stevenson. Born 1835, died 1932. Seated on the left between his niece Ginny and his cousin Alfred. He was easily identified by several of those present, and remembered fondly as a rascally uncle known for pranks and dirty jokes. Photo 11 of 14. The disappearance of Miss Yurno. During her later years, Josephine Yurno would take walks every evening at dusk around her beloved neighborhood in Connecticut. On November 12th, 1935, she set out as usual and never returned. Extensive searches were conducted by a large team of volunteers and the Norwich police force, but no sign of her was ever found. 3 years later, Mrs. Yurno was found squatting in front of a neighbor's house, without a mark on her body and in perfect health. When asked where she had been, Miss Yurnaw was unable to understand the question. From her point of view, no time had passed at all. Against the advice of her neighbors and doctors, she refused all medical treatment and resumed her life as if nothing ever happened, including her nightly strolls. Another neighbor snapped this shot of her in the fall of 1938. Clouds of smoke from piles of burning leaves gave it an appropriately eerie feeling. On the same day in November 1940, 5 years later, was her initial disappearance. Miss Yurnaw vanished again. This time, she was never seen again. Photo 12 of 14. The Fate of Sally York. In 1912, threshing of little Sally York, aged 9, in the cotton loom of the North Fork Textile Mill was one of the handful of such accidents that happened and helped legislators push through the Kedding-Owen Act of 1916, the first child labor law in American history. From the time of this accident until the mill's closing 4 decades later, workers would continuously complain of cold spots, strange noises, and sudden taps on shoulders when no one was there. The mill's foreman never paid these complaints any mind until this photograph surfaced in 1932. It was taken by a traveling photographer named Benny Johnson, who promptly sold it to the Norfolk Gazette for an unprecedented $10. The mill had shut down for the Christmas holiday and was completely empty at the time. The photo was later blamed for the closing of the mill, though the Great Depression was the more likely cause of that. Photo 13 of 14. Lily Palmer's Eyes. Lily Palmer was not quite 4 when she experienced what the doctors would later call acute onset of sensory hallucinations. This photograph, taken by Lily's mother, Annette, on Halloween night, 1952, purportedly captures the arrival of her disorder. Lily and her Filipino nanny were setting out for a round of trick-or-treating when the child suddenly screamed and began to claw at her eyes. It was some time before she was calm enough to speak, but when asked what she saw, Lily repeatedly spoke about things clawing in her eyes. Several days later, while unsupervised in her bedroom, Lily punctured both her eyes with one of her mother's knitting needles. After receiving medical treatment, she was evaluated and committed, and remained institutionalized for the rest of her life. And later at the Rockland Psychiatric Center in Orangeburg, where she remained until she died of a heart attack in March 2001. A call to one of her former caregivers at Rockland confirms that Lily's episodes were most traumatic on and around Halloween night. But for the majority of her life, she could be heard begging and pleading with the staff to help her get these things out of her eyes. Photo 14 of 14. The Trinity Deception. This is one of several famous photographs taken of the first ever nuclear bomb, conducted by the U.S. Army on July 16, 1945, in the White Sands Proving Ground located about 35 miles southeast of Surco, New Mexico. The setting off of this implosion-designed plutonium device ushered the atomic age and the eventual arms race between the United States and Russia. Only a handful of people were aware that this photo was cropped before it was ever released to the public. And now that they're all dead, one of them, the original photographer, who gave the author a copy of the original, on the condition that he kept it out of the public eye until such a time that citizens of the world could handle what it depicts. The author remains uncertain whether this criteria has been met, but given that he likely owns the last existent copy, he has decided his responsibility rests with the truth. Hey ghouls, this creepypasta has like a bunch of mini creepypastas within the creepypasta. I thought it was really interesting. This was like the only one I could find for the state that wasn't like 2 minutes long. And this one ended up being a freaking half-hour long. It took me forever to record and edit and put the audio in and all that jazz. It took a little while, so I hope you ghouls liked it. I hope it was worth it, because I liked it. It was really interesting. And honestly, I would love to have like a book the way that they described it in this creepypasta with all these like creepy pictures and little factoids about the creepy pictures. I feel like that would sell real good, and I personally would buy it. But as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.